This year's 30th anniversary Pokémon Presents seemed jam-packed, but there were two announcements which really got my attention. First up, Pokémon Champions in April, making it the second game alongside Tomodachi Life, despite the month generally being a bit of a dead zone for Nintendo. Now, as it's a mobile simultaneous launch, Nintendo may be less worried about its scheduling, but it still pushes back the date at which Nintendo probably needs to start dropping a direct in terms of revealing new content for their next few months. After all, if they use Mario Day to launch Yoshi for May, which fits with their previous announcement of a spring release date, then their next unannounced game could well be late May and even June, and so a direct in March or April is perfectly plausible, especially if they date Fire Emblem in a dedicated direct. Now, I do expect Nintendo to do some kind of direct by the end of the financial year, but as I've alluded to many times now, I think they will want to get the maximum bang from sales linked to the movie before announcing a new Mario, and if they don't have too much else besides new Mario, that might be something which causes them to delay. That said, this links to the second eyebrow spiker of this presentation. Pokémon Gen 10 is coming in 2027. First of all credit to the Pokémon Company, and I suspect to Nintendo, who, after Scarlet and Violet, received some criticism after launch, but did have a fair bit of egg on their face. It seems that they are taking the time to make sure that the next release is really one to remember. Now, 4 years seemed to me like the minimum gap they would take, but nearly 5 or perhaps even a full 5 years potentially really does show a serious commitment to making this one an absolute belter. Now, of course, Pokémon Legends is an essential part of this story, and without these interstitial games, I think it would have been very difficult to have the Pokémon Company wait that long for a new release. I think there will be lessons there for the Zelda and Mario series as well, where I expect by now there are probably already 2 concurrent teams working on mainline offerings, so important are those titles to Nintendo's future. It just seems like the only plausible way to manage the difficulties of making games of the kind of scale that we're now seeing from the Switch 2. Still, while it's going to be delayed, I wonder how long it will be delayed. And by the way, by delayed, I simply mean delayed compared to our expectations. They've never actually announced it, so it can't actually be physically delayed. But the end of the financial year in March has to be a major possibility, as it would obviously look good for Nintendo and the Pokémon Company to have it out in this fiscal year coming up. But of course, if not, they may find it worth their while pushing it to the 2027 holiday season. The fact is, though, like with Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, new Pokémon will be the biggest game of whatever month it's released in, irrespective of whether it releases in a holiday. This also solves one conundrum I've been considering recently, specifically that if Pokémon launched before a light system, it will be the first mainline Pokémon game to be on what is essentially, despite its hybrid form factor, a home console machine primarily. The original Lite launched 2.5 years ago after the Switch in September, but if Nintendo want to push the hardware in a big way prior, I could certainly see them launching it in April. I'm not sure whether Pokémon will be a launch game, but if it were, that would obviously rocket it off the store shelves straight away, which is something Nintendo will clearly want, having already had a very successful launch with the Switch 2 back in June. But circling back to the Mario of it, if Nintendo doesn't actually have a 3D Mario this year, then things look quite bleak for them in certain respects. Still, I reiterate how crazy these few months around the film are. Pocopia, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Tomodachi Life, Pokémon Champions, and almost certainly Yoshi in a 2 to 3 month span during what's normally the quietest time of the year for them. Perhaps they think the film will move big sales, but I also think there's clearly a confidence that they have a bunch of games to support the Switch 2 for the rest of the year. Otherwise, I don't think they bunch everything up in quite this way. The only question is, which games? For my part, I still can't look past 3D Mario as the only one that feels deliverable in the time frame and of sufficient scope to answer all critics. However, this does open the field up in terms of the holiday season more broadly. Splatoon Raiders has the clout to anchor a holiday title, but don't forget that not every game that comes out this time period are necessarily top sellers. It's also a time of year we've seen The World Ends With You, Bayonetta 3, Metroid Prime 4, Big Brain Academy, and more of the smaller scale. Removing Pokémon may put into play a number of smaller titles. WarioWare just got more likely, I suspect. and we could more easily see 2 Zelda releases, although I would still temper expectations on them being megaton AAA titles, since I think it's more likely that Nintendo will want to fill the anniversary and pre-film window with existing or more casual content that they will sell as new to the newly expanded audiences. And of course, the one franchise that still feels decently likely, I think, to get a title in this window remains Pokémon. It's not unheard of for Pokémon to skip a holiday window. 2024 comes to mind immediately, but it is exceptionally rare, and even when they're down mainline titles, they often do manage to serve up something else besides. Pokémon Tournament, Detective Pikachu. Now, generally, they announce these kinds of things ahead of time, and that perhaps scuppers the likelihood, but it depends on the circumstances. I mean, if Koei Tecmo's commission of Pokopia included the quid pro quo that the Warriors team could get their hands on Pokemon, that's the kind of title that might need more development time before it's ready to reveal, but could anchor, let's say, an August Pokemon Presents. I'm not going to give a percentage for this right at this point, and of course, I had similar suspicions in 2024 which proved unfounded, but it's still something that I would mull over. In some ways, there is a silver lining. Shuntaro Furukawa, in his recent interviews and in his investor briefing, was clearly hinting that some games would be delayed from expectations, and while officially there was no guarantee that Pokemon would ever hit 2026, it was very widely expected. If this was the major delay he had in mind, it might mean good things for the rest of Nintendo's schedule, though of course I'm sure he was also considering titles like Zelda and Smash, where original titles remain unlikely for a fair while yet, given the recent commitment of the development teams to Tears of the Kingdom and Kirby Air Riders. Okay, so having gone through the general announcements and thoughts on the strategy, what did I actually think of the present itself? Firstly, although many of the announcements were on the smaller side, I did love how packed it was. The only real title that grabbed my attention in a major way, as a very fair-weather Pokemon player, was Wind and Waves, and it looked fine, but not world-changing. We're so used to the cliché of the people looking out over vast open worlds, but all these areas were actually quite enclosed, which I find interesting. There was a lot of detail, though. The broiling ocean looked particularly terrific, and I do like the sunny vibes. I'm also impressed that it involves underwater exploration, as this seems to have been a big barrier in recent Nintendo titles, with Mario Kart World, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Donkey Kong Bonanza all eschewing underwater action, even though all these series have gone in for it previously. I assume there is some kind of technological reason why this is pretty tricky, and I've long had a theory that the floaty mechanics as you approach the water temple in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom are recycled mechanics from an underwater area that got canned, but it's nice to see the Pokemon Company going where Nintendo don't at the moment. The new starters look like they could grow on me, but I never really vibe with the new characters quite as much as the classics. Of course, it looks like I've got another year to get around to Scarlet and Violet as well, which I still haven't played, and to be perfectly honest, there is so much that I'm enjoying revisiting from the Switch that I'm not in any urgent need of any new games right now. Also, although I've long avoided deep diving the Pokemon Company, I still haven't exactly done so. On the Patreon for Pokemon Day, I've launched a podcast analysing the situation with Pokemon's ownership and investigating whether that ownership stake might change in years to come, and if so, when, why, and how. Eventually, I expect I will edit it together into a video for the channel, but for the time being, it remains a Patreon exclusive, although please do like, share, subscribe, and continue to support the channel for more over the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.